Welcome to the final lecture of DT101. This is Lecture 7, Putting It All Together. Over the past 6 lectures, we've built the full toolkit: how to empathize with users, how to define sharp problem statements, how to generate and select ideas, how to prototype cheaply, and how to test with real people and learn from what you find. Today we step back from the individual techniques and look at how they work as a complete system. We'll walk through a real case study, look at where teams most commonly get stuck, and talk about how to bring design thinking into your own work, whatever constraints you're working under. We're at the end of the road. 7 lectures, 5 stages, 1 integrated process. Lectures 1 through 6 each went deep on one piece of the framework. This lecture is about synthesis, seeing how the pieces connect, where the seams are, and how to use the full cycle effectively in messy, real-world conditions. If any earlier lecture didn't fully land for you, today's case study is a chance to see everything in context and fill in the gaps. Before we dive into the case study, let's revisit the full cycle with fresh eyes. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, and back again. The key word in that last part is back. This is not a one-way conveyor belt. Every stage produces insights that can and should feed back into earlier stages. Testing might reveal a gap in your empathy research. Prototyping might expose a flaw in your problem definition. That looping isn't failure, it's the process working exactly as intended. The real value of design thinking isn't any single stage, it's the connective tissue between them. Nothing you discover is wasted, because every insight sharpens the next iteration. The case study we'll walk through today is a hospital discharge redesign for elderly patients. The problem was high rates of 30-day readmission, patients returning to the hospital within a month of being discharged, often because they were confused about their post-discharge care. The team consisted of 2 nurses, 1 designer, and a patient advocate. And here's the detail that set the whole project in motion: when staff were surveyed, they believed the discharge instructions were clear and complete. When patients were surveyed, they did not. That gap, between what the team assumed and what users actually experienced, is exactly the kind of assumption that design thinking is built to surface. If the team had skipped the research phase, they would have optimized the wrong thing entirely. Rather than relying on that survey data, the team embedded themselves on the ward. They shadowed patients on discharge day for 6 hours, watching, listening, following the actual journey from "the doctor says you can go home" to the moment the patient walked out. What they found was striking. Patients received a 14-page discharge document. Almost none of them read it. Relatives, who would often be the ones managing post-discharge care, frequently arrived late and missed the verbal instructions from nursing staff. But the key insight, the one that changed everything downstream, was this: discharge day is one of the most anxious days in a patient's experience. And when people are anxious, their ability to absorb new written information drops dramatically. That insight could only have come from direct observation. No survey would have surfaced it. Armed with those insights, the team moved into define. Their point of view statement read: an elderly patient needs a simple visual summary of their care because anxiety on discharge day blocks their ability to process written instructions. Notice how specific that is. It names the person, it names the need, and it gives a real human reason why. Their "how might we" question became: how might we give patients one clear thing to look at after they leave? The team initially considered the framing, "how might we improve discharge documentation?" But they discarded it. Can you see why? That question already assumes the solution is a document. It's what we call solution-baked. The better HMW left the solution space open, which made everything that followed more creative. The ideation session included the full team. Both nurses joined the Crazy Eights exercise alongside the designer and the patient advocate. This is worth emphasizing: the people with the deepest domain knowledge are often the most valuable contributors in ideation, because they can spot which ideas are practical and which are fantasy. In 45 minutes, the team generated over 50 ideas. The range was enormous, from a phone hotline patients could call with questions, to illustrated comic strips, to a laminated checklist, to a hospital app with push reminders. After a round of voting, 3 finalists emerged. And the winner, the one that went through to prototyping, was a laminated visual checklist. Cheap to produce, easy to test, and directly connected to the insight about anxiety-blocking text. The team ran 3 prototype rounds in 2 days. Round 1 was a laminated card using standard medical icons. Patients and relatives loved the format, something small, physical, and easy to refer to. But the icons were confusing. Medical iconography is not as universal as medical professionals assume. Round 2 replaced the icons with photographs of the actual tasks, a real pill bottle, a real bandage, a real GP door. Comprehension jumped significantly. Round 3 added one more element, a strip at the bottom with a phone number to call if anything was unclear. That final addition completed the loop. It gave patients a safe exit if the card wasn't enough. The pilot result, 30-day readmission rates dropped by 18% in the ward where the checklist was used. That's not a marginal improvement. That's a lives and costs outcome, achieved with a piece of laminated card. Let's talk about failure modes, because knowing where the process breaks down helps you recognize the warning signs in real time. The most common is skipping Empathise. The justification usually sounds confident: we know our users, we've been doing this for years. But the hospital case study shows exactly what's at stake. The staff were experienced, well-meaning professionals, and they still had a fundamental blind spot about what patients were actually experiencing. When you skip Empathise, every stage downstream is solving the wrong problem. The second failure mode is a weak define, a vague POV that doesn't name a real person or a real human insight. When your HMW is too broad, ideation scatters in every direction and nothing connects back to users. The third is premature convergence, seizing on the first good idea because the team is tired or the deadline is looming. Remember, the best ideas rarely appear before idea 30 or 40. And the fourth is building high-fidelity prototypes too soon. Once something looks polished, teams defend it instead of testing it. Keep it rough until you've learned something. One of the most common objections to design thinking is that it takes too long. And in some forms, that's fair. But the framework is far more adaptable than people assume. The design sprint, developed at Google Ventures, compresses the entire process into 5 days, with concrete outputs at each stage. If you're a solo practitioner, structured journaling and guerrilla interviews in a coffee shop can replace a full empathy research program. Large organizations with parallel workstreams can run simultaneous empathy research across multiple user segments and synthesize findings centrally. And if you're truly time poor, a 2-hour rapid empathy sprint, even 3 conversations with real users, will always beat no research at all. The mindset adapts, the human-centered spirit must not. Design thinking doesn't compete with other methods, it complements them. If your team uses Agile, design thinking belongs at the front of the process, before the backlog even exists. It answers the question that Agile assumes has already been answered: what should we build? If your team uses Lean Startup, design thinking can replace the build phase with cheap paper prototypes, so you learn before you invest in code. And if you or your organization uses systems thinking to map complex interdependencies, design thinking pairs beautifully with it at the define stage. After you've framed the problem, systems thinking helps you stress test whether your proposed solution might create unintended consequences elsewhere in the system. These aren't competing frameworks. They're complementary lenses. Design thinking is a skill, and like all skills, it only grows through deliberate repetition. Here's how to build the habit deliberately. Start with something low stakes, not your highest visibility project, but a real problem you care about. Apply the full 5-stage process, even roughly. Then, after every project, run a brief debrief. Which stage felt weakest? Where did you cut corners? That honest reflection is where the learning happens. Second, teach it. Explaining design thinking to a colleague, a team, or even a skeptical manager forces you to articulate the logic more clearly than any course can. And third, find a community. IDOU, the Stanford D. School, and the Interaction Design Foundation all offer courses, events, and cohorts of practitioners at every level. You don't have to figure this out alone. 3 things to carry forward from this course. First, every stage feeds the next, and insights loop back freely. This is not a linear process, and you should never treat it as one. Second, skipping Empathise is the most common and the most costly mistake in design thinking. Everything downstream depends on getting this right. And third, the method adapts to constraints, but the human-centered spirit must not. You can compress the timeline, simplify the tools, and adapt the format, but the commitment to understanding real people before making decisions for them is non-negotiable. That's the foundation everything else is built on, and it's what separates design thinking from just another productivity method. We'll close the course with 3 questions. The first, which stage of the DT cycle gets cut first when a project is under time pressure, and what is actually lost when that happens? Think about the hospital case study and what would have been missed if the team hadn't done the 6-hour shadow observation. The second, a colleague tells you that design thinking is just common sense with extra steps. How would you respond? What would you point to as evidence that the structured process produces meaningfully different outcomes? And the third, think of something you're working on right now, a project, a problem, a decision. Which DT stage would add the most value if you applied it this week, and what would that actually look like? Thank you for completing DT101. Go build something people actually need.